Welcome to the Introversion Podcast. This is the very first episode. Thing is, even though this is the first episode of the Introversion Podcast, I've actually hosted a podcast called Confusianity. I did 10 episodes, one season, currently queuing up episodes for a second season. But the reason why I bring that up is I found starting that podcast a lot easier than this one for a couple of reasons. One is it was highly focused on religion, and perhaps most importantly, what made it easier than what it is that I'm starting now is it's an interview format. So basically every episode I would have a guest on and interview them on their upbringing, their experience with religion. So I find that very easy. Even though I was brand new to podcasting, I found that format very easy because I enjoy conversations with people. I enjoy, meeting new people, forging new connections, but also going deeper with friends and family, people I've known for a long time. And that podcast format for Confusianity suited me really well, and I found that enjoyable and easy to get the hang of. What I'm doing now with introversion for me is a lot more complicated because on the one hand, I hate writing. So I didn't want to script out these podcast episodes. To me, that would be not just time consuming, but it would feel really arduous. And I don't really know that I would be able to maintain a podcast in any long-term sense if I had to sit down at the computer and write everything out and then basically read it. To me, that wouldn't be fun. I just know it really wouldn't work for me. So what I'm trying right now is basically to just hit record and start talking and see where it goes, see what happens. I'm really not used to this, and I apologize if this first episode or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 really sucks.
This sucks.
I can only presume that I will get better at this. And like with any new skill or any new thing you're trying out, you're not going to be great at it when you first start out, but you keep going with it. And as with most things, if you devote yourself to something, if you practice, if you keep at it, if you build a habit, you will get better at it. That goes for me, that goes for anybody out there. So here I am starting the Introversion Podcast. Just talking by myself. It's a solo episode. I won't have any guest on this episode, and I haven't scheduled any guests for upcoming episodes. So we're just going to take it one episode at a time and see how this unfolds. So all of that is a precursor to me actually getting into whatever it is we're going to talk about today. There's obviously tons to talk about, which is partially why it's overwhelming to try to actually start this podcast. Because there's so many thoughts I have in my mind these days. There's so many things to talk about. I could literally just start a podcast about coronavirus because there's so many angles to go at this thing from. As I see it, this is not just a medical phenomenon. This is largely medical and it's largely political, but there's so much more beyond that in terms of just understanding society, culture, people, priority, fears, risks, religion, philosophy, health, but not in sort of a purely medical sense, but in terms of mental health, thriving, happiness, psychology, these kind of things that are not wholly entirely medical, but in a holistic sense, these are the things that matter. It's not just about being alive physically, but being fully alive, embracing all that it means to be alive, to be a human being. But anyway, I'm going off about that. I mean, like I said, this could be a podcast about coronavirus, but that's the thing we're all facing right now. And although this is one of those things like 9/11 where there's kind of pre-9/11 and post-9/11, and our world, our reality kind of shifted after 9/11, and things have not been the same since. And I've definitely gotten the sense that we're looking at a pre-coronavirus, post-coronavirus kind of deal here. Me personally, I would like for life to go back to as close as possible, resembling pre-corona. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case. And I don't think it's purely due to medical reasons either. I think there's a lot of power play, a lot of political moves, a lot of money to be made by very high-powered individuals behind the scene. There's a lot of agendas. there's a lot of reasons why certain things are happening. But here I am already getting into this, and I don't even specifically want to talk about coronavirus just yet. But my point is, there's a lot to talk about. And I sat here this past couple weeks, actually, wanting to get this podcast started. And I kept putting it off. I kept procrastinating because I couldn't find the focus to blot everything out, everything that's happening right now. And not just coronavirus related, but just the daily pings of the cell phone and notifications on Facebook and friends, family text messaging and my to-do lists of all these other things that I'm giving a higher priority to. It's just so much that it's hard to stop and sit down and record this, especially when, as I mentioned, I don't even really know how comfortable I feel recording a solo episode where I'm not having a conversation with someone. But all that being said, here I am. I have made the time. I am recording, and this is our first episode. And the thing that I wanted to start talking with just to get this podcast going was this idea of perfectionism. So I have been a perfectionist for most all my life. I know my sister is a perfectionist, and I think we get it from our dad. And not that he is a perfectionist in the positive sense of being just amazing at everything. Not that, but more so sort of an inability to move forward unless everything is just right. You know, unless everything is how you want it to be in your mind, you can't move forward. And it's actually a crippling thing in terms of progress for an individual, but also collectively as a society. We don't live in a perfect world, and none of us are perfect, and no public policy is perfect. And again, just I could list off everything. Nothing is perfect, which begs the question, okay, what do we do about that? And I'm guilty of this myself. I often feel paralyzed in the sense of I don't fully want to move forward until something is just right. I don't want to launch that website or that app or the new blog or this podcast, for example, unless I feel like it's just right, that I've planned it all out. I have such a clear vision for it in my mind. And the problem is, as we all know, that having that kind of mindset leads to procrastination. And it leads to ultimately a lot of things just not ever getting done or made. And that's kind of why I don't feel ready to launch this podcast right now, but I'm doing it anyways. And I do believe that this can be something special. It can be something different because I've been trying to find podcasts out there to listen to, especially during this crazy Corona time where it's not fear-mongering. It's not a conspiracy theory voice. It's not just one thing, one singular perspective on what's going on, but it's a level-headed, thoughtful, honest approach toward life. And life right now just happens to be about coronavirus and quarantine and all of this. But, you know, I've been looking for podcasts to listen to where it's just people talking about real life. And it's hard to discover that kind of thing because what I find is even the way the structure of podcasts is set up in terms of creating a podcast and submitting it, you have to specify exactly what your podcast is about. You have to say, oh, this is a cooking podcast. Oh, this is a podcast where we review movies. Oh, this is a podcast where we talk about social justice, or we talk about politics, or we talk about health tips, or whatever. And this is a problem that I see with the whole podcast world. And it's symptomatic of a bigger problem of society and internet culture in general, is that I'm finding in recent years that everything is very singular-minded. It's very homogenous in the sense of if you're going to subscribe to this particular YouTube channel or follow this Twitter account, there's an expectation of, okay, I know what I'm going to get here, and that's what I want to hear, and that's what I want to see, and that's why I'm subscribing. And a lot of times people will only subscribe to people who echo their same views, their same perspectives. And the problem with that, well, there are many problems with that. with that kind of arrangement, where is the growth? Where is the challenging of one's beliefs, of one's expectations? You know, how is anything going to change? How is your mindset going to change or evolve? How are you ever going to learn something new? And I don't mean just in terms of a bit of information or a skill, but I mean being touched or blown away by somebody else's perspective, where you're like, wow, I never thought about it that way. Or, that was interesting. You know, that's a perspective that's well outside my bubble, but they actually have a point. Maybe I should empathize and consider another person's journey and what's brought them to that point in life. You know, maybe life is not as simple as black and white. I'm right, they're wrong, or they insisting that they're right and I'm wrong. Maybe there's actually nuance to these very complicated issues that we face as a society and as individuals as we try to figure out our lives and meaning and purpose and all these things. And I mean, that's a big part of why I wanted to start this podcast, as I feel like there's a gross oversimplification of everything in our world today. It's like, whether it's a podcast or a website or a brand in general, it's as if it has to be one-dimensional. Like, it would be wrong to take a nuanced, multifaceted view toward any subject. Like, oh, you've got a podcast about baking cakes, but you actually want to take a second to talk about dating or religion or credit card debt or interior design? God forbid you should do so and be off-brand and lose your followers because you veered away from cake baking tips. Look, I get it. I've heard for years now that if you want to be successful, you need to pick one thing and be amazing at just that one thing, and people will follow you because of that one thing. And you need to tailor your content and voice toward a specific target audience. But come on. I'm a multifaceted person here with a strange background and wide array of interests and passions and seemingly conflicting personality traits and opinions. All of this coexisting in my very being is what makes me me. And I get tired of only revealing certain portions of myself to particular subsets of the population. It's frustrating to do so when really you just want to be free to be yourself, your full self, and for that to be okay with people. But unfortunately, more and more these days, I feel like society dictates that we must be way more one-dimensional than we actually are. It seems to be a prevailing trend that we all conform to these various archetypes, that you're only allowed to say certain things or have certain views in order to be accepted, that if you deviate in any way, if you have one view that's contrary to the faction you're a part of, that you will be ostracized, that you will have to fight to defend your views or just capitulate and apologize for feeling how you feel and thinking how you think. With the real world being shut down and our social lives being deemed non-essential, for a lot of us out there, our only possibility of connection with other humans is via the internet, which unfortunately means more time spent on social media. We have not been able to meet in person. There's no more face-to-face time. There's no more bars. There's no more at the job, at the office. There's no more water cooler chit-chat. There's no more sporting events. There's no more restaurants in the sense of people sitting down together to eat and have a good time together. There's barely, I don't know if people are still out there dating and hooking up, but that seems very, unlikely or risque these days to break quarantine and try to go on a date.
How dare you?
Somewhere, I don't even know. But anyway, all of these ways in which we connect in the real world literally have been taken away from us. So all we have now is online. All we have now is things like FaceTime, Zoom, Google Hangouts. It's simulating the experience of being with another person. And then the other thing we have is, like I mentioned before, we have social media. Now, social media is, let's face it, kind of toxic. And at some point, maybe I'll once I get the podcast going, I will actually come prepared with statistics and real data to share on the subjects that I'll be talking about. But I know I have seen things in the last couple of years that link teen and youth suicide rates to increased use in social media. Even without me citing the exact statistics, I'm fairly certain that you all are aware that these things are happening. That the more time people spend on social media and Facebook and all these things, the worse off they are, the less happy they are about their own life. When they compare themselves with the best of what everybody else is posting. So there's that aspect of it, even in normal times. And then there's the added toxicity of what's happening now with everyone in their own bubbles, yelling and screaming at each other about people who are in different bubbles. So nobody's really learning anything new. Nobody's really growing. Nobody's really challenging their views to think differently. Nobody's taking a step back to think, oh, maybe I might be wrong about something. Well, how would I ever know that I was wrong about something if every little morsel of media is all coming from the same place and it's all saying the same essential thing to me? And if I share those posts, if I share a CNN post or if I share a Fox News post on my Facebook page, everyone in my bubble is going to click like and comment because they also all think the same way. And they're also all getting their information from the same place. So honestly, I'm not in either bubble. I get little bits and pieces from, conservative sources and some more liberal sources. I have a wide array of friends who are all across the board in terms of, the political spectrum. And I try to just be fair and reasonable and stay connected with my friends and family despite the differing views that we might have on a number of issues. But it's really getting hard. So to recap, we're all not getting to see each other face to face anymore. And we've had to resort to simulations of being in person. So we've got that and we've got social media. And as I've stated, social media has become so toxic and fruitless in terms of personal growth and expanding one's mindset. Basically, as I see it now in the time of quarantine, the only thing social media is doing is providing people a sense of, it's just reinforcing people's existing views. And that makes people feel good because human beings want to have their views mirrored. They want to feel comfortable, like they're in a group of people who think similarly, who won't judge them for their views. People want to be accepted. This is nothing new. Whether you're a little kid in kindergarten or in high school or whatever, everybody's looking to belong. Everybody's looking for some sense of community, some sense of acceptance, some form of validation, really. And social media is kind of the low-hanging fruit that's providing that, but kind of at the cost of everything else that might really matter more so in life. So I don't know. I find all of this really disheartening that this is where we're at. And I will admit, as much as I've tried to keep an open mind and not blot out friends with differing views, staggeringly different views than I have, as much as I have not blocked them in the past, and I've always tried to be open to their views, because I didn't ever want to create a bubble for myself the way they have. I've reached my breaking point with that. And last week, I was kind of overcome with this dread and this negativity. And it's actually, the plus side of it is that's actually what sparked me wanting to start this podcast, was I felt the depression coming upon me. And it was a Saturday morning a couple weeks ago, and it was quite palpable, this feeling that just came over me of, what am I even doing? Like, why am I bothering with anything? And I felt this heaviness, and I went and lied down on my bed and just felt like not getting up. Of course, there are a lot of things to do. There's a lot of things on my to-do list, but it just felt like all of them were pointless. And this was really deeply concerning to me when I reached this point, because I've experienced depression in the past. And one thing a friend of mine said to me a couple years ago that really stuck with me, when we were talking about depression, he said, if you're actually getting things done, if you're moving forward and doing things in your life, it's very hard for you to be depressed and actually a productive person who's getting a lot of things done. Those two often are not going to be linked together. Whereas if you're finding it hard to be motivated to actually do anything, and a lot of time is going by and nothing's happening in your life, and you're becoming less motivated and not really seeing the point to doing anything, those are ripe conditions for depression. And I kind of remembered when he told me that, and I looked at my own life at the time and looked back at the past, and I've thought about it since. And especially during this quarantine time, I feel like my solace, my solution to getting through this time, and of course I'm an introvert, so I'm okay with a lot of alone time, but even I have my limits, But I can say the thing that has gotten me through this is just a very strong sense of making the most of this time and being productive and keeping myself busy and learning new skills and launching new websites and being creative in this time and starting my sketchbook project, starting this podcast, like just keeping myself busy, keeping my mind busy with positive, creative things that I can look forward to later on in terms of seeing them expand and grow into other opportunities to connect with other people and, to get some business moving. And so when I felt that a couple weeks ago, that heaviness of like, what's the point of even trying any of these things? That's where I got really concerned, because I knew depression is just kind of lurking around the corner. And, luckily I had a good conversation with my mom that day, and that's not even really what snapped me out of it, because I still lied down for a couple hours there. And I remembered it was a beautiful day outside, but I had no motivation to go run. I had no motivation to get outside, to start working on anything creatively. I just had no motivation. And luckily, I was able to force myself up and just get going. And again, I'm obviously no doctor, in terms of prescribing medicine or treating people for depression. I can only speak from my own personal experience, but I know a lot of people are struggling right now during quarantine, and I'm talking about people who are single, people who are married, people who are old, people who are young, children. Everybody's struggling with this in their own way. And all I can do is say, hey, this worked for me, and maybe it's something for you to keep in mind for yourself as well. Maybe it can help you. Is basically, if you're feeling that depression come on, you want to do your best to nip it in the bud, because I feel like the more you let that cloud come over you, the worse it will get and the harder it will be for you to pick yourself up and break free from it. So luckily for me, I was able to do that even though I wasn't in the mood. I got outside, I went for a run, got some sunshine, fresh air, and it did help. And I just kind of started thinking about, all right, well, what's something real that I can work on that can have an immediate effect? Not necessarily on others, but at least for myself. And I thought about this podcast, and I thought about just get it going, because, and this is sort of to pivot onto another thing, but in recent years, and I'm not going to get all into that right now, but I've had to let go of a lot of people in my life, friends and some family as well. And I've basically arrived at a place where And going back to what I said originally about leaving religion and really not believing in this God and Jesus anymore, is like, when you've been through all these things, it can lead you to either despair or a greater sense of strength and determination within yourself. And that's where I'm at now. And I almost feel like everything that I've been through in the last few years has led me to having the strength and determination to get through not only a rough patch like right now during quarantine, during lockdown, but also with what's to come. Because unfortunately, it's not like Trump's going to snap his fingers and all of a sudden the whole country's going to open up and everything's going to be hunky-dory, you know. Even the people who want to reopen America tomorrow, even for that, it's like things are just, it's not going to be that smooth. So individually, I feel like we have to prepare ourselves for the hardship, not only that we're experiencing now, but also with what's to come. And I feel like I'm grateful in the sense of all the hardships and things I've had to go through in recent years, because it's prepared me to deal with this and what is to come. And whoever's listening to this right now, I don't know your story. I don't know how you're feeling right now, whether it's hard for you to get up in the morning, to get out of bed, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling sad, frustrated. I don't know. I would love to know. Like, I really would love to hear from more people, not just my friends in my immediate circle, but I would love to hear from people out there on the internet, you know, people who I haven't met yet. But, you know, just real human beings out there. I want to hear from you. So if you're listening to this podcast, there's all kinds of ways to connect. Visit introversion.com. There's a connect form. You can send a quick message there. You can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm basically Jay Kaslow. That's JayKaslo at everywhere on social media. So all that being said, I want to bring it back to this concept of perfectionism. I pulled this book out that I read a long time ago. It's called The Pursuit of Perfect by Ben Shahar. I think he's a Harvard professor. And I read this book, it must have been like 10 years ago or so, maybe a little less. And the reason why I pulled it out of my bookshelf was I thought there would be a good line in here about perfectionism, and I could use that to kind of explain what's prevented me from actually starting this podcast and recording this first episode these last couple of weeks. But as I started rereading it the last couple of days, I found some real gems in here. And I wanted to share a little bit from the book because I feel like it really applies to not only perfectionism as a crippling factor in me starting this podcast or that sort of thing, but I actually feel like it's very relevant to what's happening in our society today in terms of the lockdown and fear and expectations for life and society. All right, this is the part I wanted to share. Beyond determining how we evaluate others, our approach, whether we focus on the positive or the negative, has a direct impact on the way we lead our lives. What we focus on determines whether we lead an active or a passive life. Do we spend our lives running away from unhappiness, a negative, or pursuing happiness, a positive? Do we passively avoid depression or actively seek joy? Do we spend most of our time generating light or spend our days avoiding darkness? Do we lead an active, albeit risky life, promoting the good, or play it safe and do nothing, avoiding the bad? A negative focus leads to fear as the primary driving force. Fear of making mistakes, fear of imperfection, fear of castigation. After all, no one, not even our cultural icons, is able to remain pure in our eyes or the eyes of others, so who are we to try and why should we even bother? Perfectionists who focus on the negative are so afraid of doing something wrong that they often refrain from action, conform to the status quo, and end up doing nothing. In contrast, optimalists who focus on the positive understand that to act is at times to err, but that it's not the avoidance of making mistakes that creates the good life, but rather the active pursuit of the good. Focusing on the good does not mean ignoring the bad, but rather the understanding that the most effective way to eradicate the bad is to do good. In history, whether our own, our heroes, or the world's, we will always find dark patches, damned spots that taint purity. How we choose to deal with these flaws will determine our personal and collective futures. Do we shut ourselves in a barrel out of fear that we might taint our hands even more? Or do we follow the risky path of Prometheus, who gave fire to mortals and risked being burned? So yeah, I found that interesting that as I opened up this old book to find a few words to convey my struggle with just starting this podcast and procrastinating it for the last couple weeks, I stumbled across some words there that were actually quite relevant to what's going on in our society these days, because I see a lot of fear.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
And I think people have good intentions. You know, I think the problem is that whether you're not that this is a left-right issue, but you know what I mean when I say if you're in the camp that thinks we should hunker down, lock down, nobody go outside, everyone wear masks, nobody leave their home, nobody go out and exercise, all these kind of things. If you're on that end of the extreme where you think Bill Gates and WHO and the CDC are all looking out for your good and we should just do whatever they tell us to do and not question anything, if you're in that camp, I understand your reasons for that. I understand this is a scary time, and if the institutions in place that you trust are offering you advice and safety, you want to cling to that safety because you think it would be too dangerous to do otherwise. And even questioning it is not the right course of action that you think should be taken. I understand that. Now, if you're in the other camp that questions everything, doesn't trust the government, doesn't trust these big institutions and pharmaceutical companies, I understand that perspective as well, that you might be an American citizen who believes in personal freedom. And, that's kind of the American way, that you are free to walk out your door. You are free to assemble with others publicly, that you are free to speak your mind, that you are free to own a gun, to protect your family. I get that too. I understand. I feel like both sides, and again, I'm talking about extremes here. There's obviously a gradation. There are people in the middle who are trying to figure out this thing, coronavirus, what we think based on the data and what experts are advising. We're trying to figure out for ourselves where we fit into the whole thing and what our views are. So it is a spectrum. Right now, I'm just talking about sort of this extreme left or extreme right. I would just like to leave it with this, playing off of that quote I just read from The Pursuit of Perfect. That the primary motivating factor in our thoughts and our decisions and our actions is not fear. Because at the end of the day, it really just doesn't seem, and like was mentioned in that quote, if you look historically, the best decisions are usually not made under duress, under the plight of fear. And not only that, all the emotions that are at play at this time. And I understand we're human beings, we're emotional creatures. And for some people, they think, to separate ourselves from our emotions is basically to deny our humanity. Or they might even say it's impossible, because how can a person not be emotional? We are emotional beings. But to that, I would reply, look, I'm kind of an anomaly. I'm not like normal people. I get it. But I'm proof that it is possible to experience these kind of things in life and not be overcome with emotion. Of course, I have my emotions, I have my feelings, I have my own personal thoughts, but I don't want to be ruled by irrational emotions. So I do want to seek out truth. And obviously, truth is a very complex concept that I might do a whole nother episode on, just talking about the nature of truth. But there is sort of a personal truth, what I personally find to be true. But we live in such a world, and I don't think this is actually a new concept, but I think it's always been like this. But truth is highly subjective. And when it comes to religion, of course, that seems quite clear. And a lot of people make the comparison contrast between religion and science. And they say, well, I believe this. I believe in Jesus, or I believe in Allah or whatever. And somebody else comes along and says, well, there's no proof for that. And I believe in this other thing. For some things, there might be some tangible empirical proof. For other things, not so much. So we run into this situation where, okay, one person's personal truth doesn't really measure up with sort of an objectively measurable truth that we can all agree on as a species of human beings, right? But even within the scientific realm, there's still variations of the truth. Like, one thing is an agnostic, I roll with a lot of atheists now and agnostics, and there's a certain mindset that concerns me, which is almost as if science in itself has become a form of religion to people. And I find it concerning in the same way I found religious extremism to be concerning, which is a big part of why I came out of religion. Because, and let me put it this way. Let me give an example that I thought of the other day that I said to someone. There's a big push right now to just listen to the medical experts, listen to the scientists. What does Fauci say? What does WHO say? And fine, that's a good place to start. But to not question anything that they say and to just place them on a pedestal that they're the experts and they know better than me or anyone else, I feel like that's naive and it's too simplistic in the sense of this is not how we operate as people when life is normal. And I'll give you an example. If you're not feeling well and you go to see a doctor, your primary care doctor refers you to a specialist. You go see a specialist. They run some tests. That particular doctor tells you, look, I'm sorry to tell you, you have cancer or lymphoma, whatever it is. You only have 3 months to live. Okay? Now, this is a doctor. This is a medical expert who's basically telling you you're going to die. You have 3 months to live, right? Now, I don't care what you believe, whether you're atheist or Christian or whatever, but what is the natural course of action that most people take in that moment? The first inclination would be to see another doctor, to get a second opinion, to get further confirmation, rather than just trust this doctor completely and resign yourself to the fact that you will die in 3 months, right? If I'm wrong about that, somebody please correct me, but I know that's what I would do, and I'm pretty sure at least 95% of people out there would go get a second opinion. They would meet with another doctor to really try to get to the bottom of it, of what's going on with their health, right? So if that's the case, if we can agree that that is the mentality and the rationale toward receiving medical advice, knowledge, a prognosis from a medical expert, why are we suddenly not functioning like that now as a society? I still bring this up to people, but the WHO back in March, they were saying people should not be wearing masks. And that was their stance. And they have since changed that. And now they say people should wear masks. In fact, you can't go into a store here in Philly to get groceries unless you're wearing a mask. They physically won't let you in. So, it illustrates the fact that what WHO or Fauci or whoever, whatever medical expert you want to believe in and trust, they are fallible. And what they tell you today might very well be proven to be wrong tomorrow. So it's one of the things I just kind of want to put out there right now. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Sure, listen to the experts. Trust the experts. There's people who have lifelong careers in this, medical training, publications, all of this stuff. That's great. But bear in mind that just because someone's an expert doesn't mean they're always going to be right about everything 100% of the time, which also goes back to this concept of perfectionism. No one is perfect. No system is perfect. No institution is perfect. And yes, I'm a skeptical person in general, and especially having come out of religion, I'm very untrusting of large institutions and certain agendas. But if we all take a step back and we're really honest about this, aren't we all a bit skeptical when it comes right down to it? And I gave that example for a reason of you go get a second opinion if a doctor gives you a harsh diagnosis that you don't like or you don't want to hear. So just like that, to the level that you're going to engage on social media and demonize other people out there, I do hope that each of you would take a little time to dig a little deeper, do a little more research, try to see things from a different angle. Try to see your fellow Americans as people who have jobs, or I should say had jobs, people who have families, or people who are single, people who are alone, people who are old and isolated, people who are young and healthy. We have the whole spectrum here in America and, of course, across the world. And look, one of the things I say also is everybody's just trying to do the best they can. And people are just trying to survive. And people are, in general, trying to do the right thing. Now, what that right thing is different, right? You got people over here who think this is the right course of action, and people over there who think that's the right course of action, okay? But we're all Americans. We're all human beings. We all, for the most part, have a motivation of we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to make sense of this all. We're trying to move forward and carry on with life in some semblance of a reasonable and responsible way. So please stop demonizing people who don't think exactly how you do about coronavirus or politics or anything under the sun. Because ultimately it's not doing you or anyone good if everyone is just hating everybody else because they don't see eye to eye on a particular issue, no matter how serious that issue is, like coronavirus. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been reaching my limits, and the level of toxicity and negativity, it's just gotten too much for me. And I've started to remove myself from social media. I've started unfollowing. I don't think I actually mentioned that earlier. But when I talked about reaching that point, when I started to feel the depression creeping in a couple weeks ago, one of the things I did that day was I logged on to Facebook and I just went down my home feed like normal, and I looked at all the posts that were just insinuating and vicious and attacking, demonizing the other group who doesn't think like how they do. And regardless of where I fit on that spectrum, I found that level of toxicity and negativity to be harmful to me. So I systematically went through and I unfollowed all of those people that I deemed to be negative and toxic, regardless of what their views were. And I'm not saying you all should do that either. I mean, you find the right balance for yourself. All I can do is say, for me personally, I really believe, like the quote I mentioned, I really feel like staying positive through this time is the best course of action that we can take as individuals and collectively as a society. Unfortunately, I see a lot more negativity than positivity. And that might start to shift a little bit as I start to weed out some of that negativity as I've done. And the other thing I did was I went through my YouTube subscriptions a couple days later after that. And I sequestered all of the sort of more controversial, negative YouTubers and sources of information onto a different YouTube account of mine. And my primary YouTube account now is all creative people, tutorials, it's comedy, it's inspirational content, it's self-improvement, and those kind of channels, those kind of sources of content, because I have to do what I have to do to get through this. And for me, that means being productive, that means being creative, that means being positive. And hey, that's just me. And I highly recommend doing so for yourself as well, because I do find it healthy for myself. The difference has been quite noticeable in the past week and a half. I've been in much better spirits. It's actually a sunny day here, a nice day here, and I'm going to get outside and run. Yeah, I'm doing much better now. But these things don't just happen. I don't think you just kind of feel better or you feel worse. I really do believe it's the various small decisions we make. It's the influences we surround ourselves with. It's the food that we decide to buy. It's the lifestyle habits that we choose to forge or not forge, or the bad habits that we slink into. These are all of the things that shape our mood and our mindset and our outlook. So as much as I am trying to do this myself and figure out the right path forward, I encourage you all to do the same. And your particular recipe is not going to be the same as mine. And that's totally cool and totally expected. You know, every person is their own unique concoction of experiences and priorities and passions and fears. And each person needs to do what they need to do to get through this. And I know there's a lot of clamoring that we're all in this together and we all need to kind of start to, I don't know, it's like we all need to think the same. We all need to act the same. We all need to behave the same. We all need to do exactly the same thing, and adhere to these certain rules that these certain people have declared is the way forward. And we must do that or else we're all going to die. And I know there's a big sentiment of that. And for those people who do believe that, and I have a lot of friends who think that way, again, I'd just like to encourage you to maybe take a step back for a second and think. These concepts of fear and risk are highly personal. And, just think about that a bit. If I had an elderly parent who was very sick already, I would probably be taking a lot more precautions if I were to be in their presence and interact with them than, say, the normal average person out there who's a single 22-year-old who's in perfectly good health and they're not really seeing anybody in high risk. So just try to bear that in mind, that everybody's coming at this with a different set of experiences, a different set of life circumstances. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for everyone on the planet to act and function and think and believe the same way, because that's just not how humanity works. Nobody's perfect, but also nobody is the same. Each person is a unique blend of experiences and hopes and dreams and fears and aspirations. And, if we're living in a free society, people need to be free to be themselves. And obviously that does not mean going out and mass shooting and harming other people and that kind of thing, obviously. But there is a spectrum here. And if you want to go outside and jog in an open field by yourself, away from other people, there's no scientific evidence proving that by doing that, you are somehow putting the world at risk and your neighbors and everyone else, that you are killing them. So we have to strike some kind of reasonable middle ground here. So anyway, I've said a lot for this first episode, and although there's a lot more I want to talk about, let's save that for next time. Let's get into it later. But yeah, like I said, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this on some level. I hope that this has been a calming influence in your life just for this past hour listening. And and
I almost forgot.
I almost forgot to mention today's sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by
Delicious corn. Corn. Haven't had that in a while. Yeah, delicious corn. Bye.
Anyway, like I said from the get-go, I'm really glad I got this out there as a first episode just to get this thing going, and how important it can be just to start something, to get it going, even when you don't feel ready. And for that reason alone, I'm glad I posted this first episode. I hope you've gleaned something of value out of it, whether it was informative or inspiring or thought-provoking, or maybe you just got to know me if you already know me. And maybe you got to know me a little bit better and how I think, how I operate, what I'm going through. And, I do think that's important, that more individual perspectives are shared online, in a deep, meaningful way, not just a quick Facebook post or a rant or sharing a Newsweek article or a CNN video or Fox News, whatever. But I just think it's really important, perhaps in this time more than ever, that people share their stories, people share their experiences and their take on life, because we need to, how should I put this? I feel like in order to not demonize other people who are different than you, which seems to be the case a lot these days on social media with angry Twitter mobs and Facebook bubbles where people just rant and yell at and mock people who think differently than them. I don't know. I just think it can be really therapeutic for people to express themselves, in an honest, genuine way. And I hope that people can begin to accept other people who are different than you and who have different perspectives than you. Because I really hate this whole divide and conquer thing that I see happening. And it's been happening for a while now in recent years, where we have left versus right, red versus blue, conservative versus liberal, and that's it. It's a 50-50 split. This side hates the other side. It's appalling. I find it appalling. And as someone who doesn't feel like I'm in the red camp or the blue camp, or the liberal camp, or the conservative camp, or left or right. I don't really have a tribe. I don't really have a belonging in that sense. And I'm the kind of person where, I've kind of been that way my whole life. It's a little more pronounced these days because everything is so extreme, and I'm not an extremist in any direction. But I would love for more people to calm down a little bit and be more reasonable, and to empathize and to consider others, to hear each other out, to at least try to understand the other side. So anyway, I'll leave it at that for today. We're just under an hour here. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hit the subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and hope to see you next time. Take care, y'all. And remember, life's not perfect. It never has been, nor will it ever be. But move forward. Take action. Live your life.